Every month, you spend money on soap. Not enough to notice in a single trip. Just a few dollars here, a refill there, a bar and a holder you stop seeing after the first week. You have done it so many times, the motion is automatic. Pick it up, put it in the cart, move on. The average American household spends close to $150 a year on soap and personal cleaning products, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey. That number has gone up every year for 3 decades. A craftsman living in Hedeby, the Great Norse trading port on what is now the German-Danish border, documented continuously from 800 to 1050 CE, would find this genuinely baffling. Not because he was primitive, because he was already making a cleaning agent from wood he had already burned and it cost him nothing. He had a system. And there is one specific reason you do not know about it. One industry replaced it so completely that the knowledge now feels like folklore instead of chemistry. The year that replacement became irreversible, and the companies that made it happen, is coming up in about 40 seconds. But first, the part history class skipped over. When Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan documented his encounter with Rus Vikings along the Volga River in 921 CE, in the text scholars now call the Risala, he did not describe warriors. He described men who washed their faces and hands every single morning without exception. Every morning, not weekly, not on feast days, every day. This was not what Ibn Fadlan expected. He had traveled from Baghdad as a diplomatic envoy. He had met people from dozens of cultures. He wrote down what surprised him. The hygiene surprised him. The archaeological record at Hedeby confirms exactly the same picture. Else Rosedal in the Vikings, published by Penguin in 1987, catalogs the personal grooming tools found throughout Norse settlements. Fine-toothed combs carved from antler and bone, small iron tweezers, ear scoops and razors. Not one comb, hundreds. Found at every social level. Not luxury items, everyday tools. The excavations at Coppergate in York, carried out by Peter Addyman and Richard Hall and documented in the Jorvik Viking Center excavation reports, found the same thing underneath what is now a shopping street in northern England, a Norse settlement lasting from roughly 866 to 954 CE, and underneath it, comb after comb after comb. Grooming was not occasional, it was routine, and then there's the language itself. In Old Norse, Saturday is Laugardagr. That word means washing day, not a figure of speech. The literal name of the 7th day of the week was the day you wash yourself. This etymology is documented in standard Old Norse dictionaries and discussed directly in Rosedal's work. The Norse did not designate a washing day because washing was special. They named the day because washing was so expected it organized the calendar around it. A 13th century English monk known as John of Wallingford wrote, and this is in his surviving chronicle, that Norsemen living in England bathed on Saturdays, combed their hair and changed their clothes with a regularity that English women found remarkable. He was not praising them. He was complaining that English women preferred them because of it. That is the historical record. The cleanest people in medieval Europe were doing it with ash. Not soap from a bottle. Not a bar wrapped in paper. Not a delivery subscription. Ash from the fire they had already lit to stay warm. Now here is the part the industry hoped you would never think to ask about. Procter & Gamble introduced ivory soap in 1879. Lever Brothers launched Sunlight soap in the United Kingdom in 1884. By the early 1900s, both companies were running the largest advertising campaigns the world had yet seen. Full-page newspaper spreads, illustrated pamphlets handed out in schoolrooms, traveling salesmen pushing into rural communities. The message was consistent across all of it. Commercial soap was scientific. Commercial soap was modern. Homemade soap from wood ash was what your grandmother did before civilization arrived. It was not wrong. It was inconvenient. Inconvenient for a family already making a perfectly functional cleaning agent for nothing. Inconvenient for a household that could produce a year's supply of soap from the ash sitting in a fireplace that was burning anyway. Inconvenient because the chemistry involved was freely available, required no raw material purchases, no delivery schedule, and could not be invoiced. By 1910, according to manufacturing records documented in Susan Strasser's Waste and Want, a social history of American household consumption published by Owl Books in 1999, home soap making from wood ash had dropped from a standard annual household practice to something increasingly described in popular magazines as primitive and unnecessary. Not wrong, inconvenient. Viking crews solved this permanently. Then one industry made that permanent solution inconvenient. Not wrong, inconvenient. Every Norse crew operating across the trade network from Dublin to Novgorod solved this without paying anyone, without a bill, without a supplier, without a service contract. The household that makes its own ash soap today pays nothing for a cleaning agent that outperforms most commercial bars on a molecule-for-molecule basis. The physics and the chemistry have not changed by a single variable since the year 900, and almost nobody is using it. If this channel has shown you something you will not find in a consumer magazine, subscribe and hit the bell. That is all this channel does. Documented solutions that work and cost nothing. subscribe, and hit the bell. You have seen this your whole life and just never connected the dots. You know what happens when you pour water through coffee grounds. Dark water comes out the bottom. The water has pulled something out of the grounds and carries it along with it. Wood ash works the same way. You pour water through a container of ash, and what drips out the bottom is not just water anymore. It has pulled potassium carbonate out of the ash. That compound dissolves into the water and creates what chemists call potassium hydroxide. But your body already knows it as the thing that makes your hands feel slippery the moment they contact it. That slippery feeling is the chemistry working. It means the concentration is right. You have felt this before. If you have ever touched the inside of a cold fireplace with slightly wet hands and noticed that strange, smooth sensation on your fingers, you have already felt dilute lye. You already knew what this was, you just did not have the word for it. Now, take that slippery water and mix it with any animal fat. Drippings from a roast, rendered beef tallow, fat skimmed from a pot of stock, and heat the two together. And what happens is the same reaction that happens inside every bar of commercial soap on the market. The lye breaks the fat apart at the molecular level and reassembles it into something entirely new. Scientists call this saponification. Your kitchen calls it soap. The lye is completely consumed in this reaction. The finished soap contains no free lye. This is not folk chemistry. It is basic organic chemistry, covered in any first-year university chemistry course. Most people who try this get one step wrong. It is the first step, and it is not the ash, and it is not the fat. It is the moisture content of the ash before any water ever touches it, and getting it wrong is the difference between a cleaning agent that works reliably for years and a gray liquid that does nothing useful by the first wet morning. Here's what you need. I want to be honest with you about every number. A food-grade plastic bucket or a wooden barrel with a small drainage hole near the base. About 3 to 4 kilograms of dry hardwood ash. That is roughly the volume of a medium mixing bowl. Hardwood ash from oak, beech, or ash trees contains significantly more potassium carbonate than softwood ash from pine or spruce. This difference is documented in forest chemistry literature and discussed in comparative analyses of traditional European ash soap production. Softwood ash produces a result. Hardwood ash produces a better one. Animal fat. Beef tallow rendered from suet is ideal. Lard from pork works equally well. Fat collected from normal cooking works as long as it is strained clean. You need roughly equal volume to the lye water you produce. The exact ratio is 1 part fat to 1 part lye water by volume. A metal pot that you designate only for soap making. Once used for this purpose, keep it for soap only. This is not caution, it is just practical. A wooden spoon or silicone spatula. That is genuinely it. Here is the one thing most people get wrong. They use wet ash. They collect it from a fire that has not fully cooled and dried, or they store it in an open container that collects moisture from the air. And the potassium carbonate in the ash begins reacting with ambient humidity before it ever reaches water. It loses potency. The lye that drips out is too weak to saponify the fat properly. The soap never sets. What comes out is the gray, soft failure that gave homemade soap its bad reputation in the first place, and handed the commercial soap industry its most powerful argument. A craftsman burning wood in a longhouse at Hedeby in the winter of 950 CE could not afford a bad batch. He did not have a supplier to fall back on. Dry ash was not a preference, it was the condition the entire process depended on. Store your ash dry, covered, away from rain and condensation. That is the entire difference between a batch that works and a batch that does not. Now the steps. Pack your dry ash loosely into the bucket or barrel. Do not compact it. You want water to move through it slowly, not channel through gaps quickly. Loose packing is everything here. Slowly pour cold water, not hot, not warm, over the ash. The water needs time to absorb potassium carbonate as it passes through. Hot water moves too fast and extracts unevenly. Cold water poured slowly gives you a consistent concentration throughout the entire batch. Let it drain through into a second container underneath. The liquid that comes out is your lye water. It will look slightly yellow or gray-brown. That color is correct. Now, test the concentration. Float a raw egg in the lye water. If the egg sinks completely, the lye is too weak. Pour the liquid back through the ash a second time. If the egg floats with roughly a coin-sized patch of shell visible above the surface, the size of a 50-cent piece, the concentration is right. This test appears in 19th century European household manuals and in Scandinavian folk practices documented by ethnographers throughout the early 20th century. It is not laboratory precision. It is close enough to work consistently. This is the step most people skip. It is also the step that separated a Norse crew with functional gear and healthy hands from one that ran out of a working cleaning agent in the middle of a winter coastal crossing with no alternative available. The test costs nothing. It takes 10 seconds. There is no version of skipping it that ends well. If the egg test passes, gently heat your fat in the metal pot until it is fully liquid. Remove it from the heat and let it cool slightly. You want it warm to the touch, but nowhere near boiling. Slowly pour the lye water into the fat. Not the fat into the lye water. The direction of that pour matters. Lye into fat lets you control the mix. Fat into lye causes uneven local reactions at the point of contact. Stir constantly from the moment lye water first touches fat. Continue stirring over very low heat for 20 to 30 minutes. You will watch the mixture change in stages. It starts separate and oily, then it clouds, then it thickens, then it begins to look like thin, pale porridge. Then it reaches what soap makers call trace. The moment when a thin stream poured from the spoon sits visibly on the surface for a full second before sinking back in. That is saponification completing. That is soap forming in your pot. Pour it into a mold, a wooden box lined with cloth, a silicone baking mold, any heat-tolerant container with straight sides. Let it sit completely undisturbed for 24 hours. What you unmold is soft soap, not a hard commercial bar. A pale paste, slightly translucent, firmer around the edges, softer at the center. It will harden and cure over the following 2 to 3 weeks as remaining water evaporates out. To test whether it is finished and fully safe, press the back of your wrist lightly against the surface. If you feel even a faint tingle, the soap is not fully cured. There is still some unreacted lye present. Wait 3 more days and test again. When the sensation is completely neutral on your skin, when it feels like nothing at all, the soap is ready. No instrument, no test strip, just skin. You have built something that cleans, costs nothing, and is made from material that most households send to a landfill or scatter in a garden bed without a second thought. If this is the kind of documented solution you want more of, subscribe and join this community. Every video here is built exactly the same way. Real history, real chemistry, real cost. One batch of ash soap solves one household's cleaning needs for weeks. What a Norse settlement of 300 people did with the same principle at full scale, and what that means for how you think about what you actually need to spend in a year, is the part that changes the math entirely. The Norse trading settlement at Hedeby, documented through decades of excavation and catalogued in Elsa Rosedal's work and in the Schleswig-Holstein State Museum's published excavation reports, was not a village of occasional soap users running small individual batches. It was a permanent settlement operating continuous production of basic necessities at scale. The archaeological record shows craft production happening in volumes that only make sense for trade and community distribution. Antler combs produced by the thousands, metalwork at industrial output. The same logic applied to every consumable the settlement needed. When you are operating at settlement scale, the ash from communal hearths and cooking fires is no longer a waste product. It is a raw material input with zero acquisition cost, arriving every single day. A family of 4, running normal cooking and moderate home heating through a single winter, generates enough ash for multiple batches of soap across the same period. No bills, no deliveries, no asking anyone's permission to be clean. There is one condition where this works less well. Norse craftsmen understood it. They operated in coastal saltwater environments, in freshwater river systems, in hard limestone geology, in soft highland peat water. They encountered every water type that Northern Europe produces. The way they accounted for the one condition that reduces ash soap's performance is the last thing in this script. Soft ash soap performs poorly in hard water. Hard water carries high concentrations of calcium and magnesium minerals dissolved from limestone geology. The potassium soap reacts with those minerals and produces a white insoluble film that does not rinse cleanly and does not lather in any useful way. You have seen this if you have ever washed your hands in a hard water area and felt a slight residue left behind, even after thorough rinsing. The documented solution, found in Scandinavian folk practice records collected by ethnographers in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and discussed in Sigrid Sko's studies of traditional Nordic household production, is simple. Add a small amount of extra fat to the batch beyond what the lye calculation calls for. That excess fat does not react with lye because there's not enough lye left to react with it. It stays free in the finished soap. Those free fat molecules coat the mineral ions in hard water and allow the soap to lather and rinse normally. The ratio requires no calculation. For every 10 measures of fat in your batch, use 11. That one extra measure stays free in the finished bar. It solves hard water. 1 extra spoonful of fat. That is the entire adjustment. The Gokstad ship, built around 890 CE and excavated on the western shore of the Oslo Fjord in 1880, now standing in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, was not carrying commercial cleaning products when it was provisioned for a voyage. The crew that sailed it, and the Norse craftsmen who maintained its hull, its rigging, its tools, and their own hands through weeks at sea, operated with what they had brought and what they could make from what was already on board. The ash from their cooking fire, the fat from their provisions. The chemistry of saponification has not changed since that ship was launched into the cold water of the Oslo Fjord. The potassium carbonate in hardwood ash still reacts with animal fat in exactly the same sequence of steps. The egg float test still gives you the same concentration reading. The wrist test still tells you the same thing about curing. What you built today uses the same chemistry, the same raw materials, the same test that a craftsman in Hedeby ran on a Tuesday morning in the winter of 950 CE before handing a finished batch across a market stall to a family preparing for a crossing. I do not know what brought you here. Maybe the cost of everything adding up in ways that stopped making sense. Maybe the feeling that there is a simpler way underneath all of it and you just could not find it until now. It does not matter. It works either way.